Ignore him completely. And watch what happens. You want to know something powerful. Most people think giving more is what brings someone closer. That chasing them, the checking in all the time, showing just how much you care, that this is the way to win someone over. But what if I told you the real shift happens when you stop doing all of that? Yes, ignore him. Now, I don't mean ignore him with bitterness. I don't mean slam the door and cross your arms and stew in resentment. I mean emotionally detach. I mean reclaim your energy. I mean choose your peace over his inconsistency. Because the moment you stop orbiting around him, something incredible happens. First, you begin to see clearly. You start noticing all the little things you've been brushing off. The disrespect, the emotional laziness, the way he only shows up when it's convenient. You stop romanticizing the version of him that only lives in your head. And instead of waiting around for him to give you breadcrumbs, you realize you're hungry for a full meal. Second, you start to glow differently. You begin investing in you, your joy, your confidence, your passions. You dress for you, you speak for you. You laugh, love, and live for you. And people notice that energy, not just him. Everyone. You become magnetic, not because you're trying to impress him, but because you've turned the spotlight inward. And third, and this is the part no one tells you, he will notice. When you stop chasing, the balance shifts, the power dynamic flips. He starts asking questions. Why isn't she texting? Where did she go? Who's making her smile now? It messes with his ego, because suddenly he's not the center of your universe anymore. And let's be honest, he liked being that, but now he's got competition, not from another man, but from your peace, your progress, your self-worth. Here's the true thing. You teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate. When you ignore the behavior that drains you, you're sending a message. I'm not playing this game anymore. And when you show someone that you won't be available on demand, that you have boundaries, that your world doesn't revolve around them, they either rise to meet your standard or they remove themselves. And both are a win. Ignoring him doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've decided to stop caring more than he does. It means you're done with emotional gymnastics. It means you're not wasting another day trying to decode mixed signals, trying to guess if you're enough, trying to hold on to someone who keeps letting go. You know what's more attractive than chasing someone? Having the strength to walk away. Having the self-respect to say, if I have to beg for your attention, I don't want it. So ignore him, not to manipulate him, not to punish him, but because you're too focused on healing, growing, and leveling up to entertain anyone who doesn't see your value from the start. And here's what happens next. He might come back. He might suddenly realize what he lost. He might reach out, testing the waters, trying to pull you back in. But you'll be different now. Because when you ignore him, you're not just showing him your power, you're discovering it for yourself. Ignoring him isn't about bitterness. It's about reclaiming your peace and emotional energy. Most people misunderstand what it really means to pull away from someone emotionally. They think ignoring means someone the silent treatment out of spite or trying to manipulate their behavior. But it's not about that. It's about creating space so you can breathe again. It's about stepping back and asking yourself, what am I actually getting out of this connection? Because if the answer is stress, confusion, and self-doubt, then you already know it's time to shift. Bitterness keeps you stuck. Peace sets you free. When you ignore someone from a place of inner strength, you're not doing it to hurt them. You're doing it to protect yourself. You're preserving your sanity. You're reclaiming all the time and energy you've been pouring into someone who never really filled your cup back. Emotional energy is not infinite. It drains you when you constantly wonder why they haven't called, when they'll show up again, or what you did wrong. You start living in your head instead of your life. You stop focusing on what makes you happy because you're too busy trying to make sense of someone else's mixed signals. And that's where ignoring becomes powerful. It interrupts the cycle. It breaks the pattern. Because when you ignore, you're not just turning off notifications. You're turning off your emotional access to someone who hasn't earned it. You stop being available for breadcrumbs. You stop being their emotional safety net. And in doing so, you remind yourself of your worth. You begin to see that the version of love you were clinging to was more about potential than reality. You were in love with the idea of what could be, not what was. There's nothing bitter about choosing peace. There's nothing cold about deciding you're done wasting your emotional bandwidth on someone who doesn't show up for you consistently. Ignoring him gives you the power to hear your own thoughts again. You stop being influenced by his moods, his absence, his occasional charm that always seems to show up just when you start to pull away. You stop waiting for the good days to come back and start creating new ones for yourself. You redirect all that attention, that energy, that emotion inward. You begin to rebuild. You start listening to yourself again. What makes you feel safe? What makes you feel seen? What excites you, grounds you, moves you? You begin to reconnect with the parts of you that got lost while trying to keep that connection alive. And in doing so, you begin to realize that you don't need someone to validate you in order to feel valuable. You are already whole. You don't need their attention to feel beautiful. You already are. You don't need their love to feel enough. You always have been. When you stop chasing, you gain clarity and stop romanticizing who he could be. There's a kind of fog that comes over your mind when you're always in pursuit of someone. You start making excuses for them. You start minimizing the moments that hurt you and magnifying the rare moments they were kind or present. You build a version of them in your head that feels comforting, hopeful, and full of possibility, even when their actual behavior shows you something very different. This is what chasing does. It keeps you hooked on potential. It tricks you into thinking that if you just try harder, love harder, wait longer, they'll finally become the person you believe they can be. But what happens when you stop? What happens when you stop texting first, stop reaching out, stop constantly checking their social media, stop rearranging your life to accommodate their inconsistency? Something inside you shifts. That fog begins to lift. The image you built of them starts to fade, and the reality of who they truly are begins to appear more clearly. You notice the patterns. You see how often they cancel plans, how little they actually listen, how rare their affection feels unless they think you're slipping away. You start to separate the fantasy from the facts. That clarity is a gift, because when you're constantly chasing, your emotions lead and your logic gets buried. You override red flags. You silence your intuition. You convince yourself that the love you want is just around the corner if you can just be a little more patient, a little more understanding, a little more forgiving. But when you stop chasing, you allow yourself to look at the situation without the rose-colored glasses. You stop thinking about how good things could be and start seeing them for what they are. And here's what most people don't realize. Clarity hurts, but it also heals. It's painful to admit that someone you cared about isn't capable of loving you in the way you deserve. It's hard to look at the truth when the fantasy was so much more comforting. But facing that truth is what sets you free. You no longer need to perform, to prove your worth, to shrink yourself into the shape they want. You begin to reclaim your vision, your strength, your sense of direction. When you stop chasing, you take your power back. You stop giving someone the authority to decide how you feel about yourself. You realize that your value was never dependent on their attention. You see the person you were so desperate to be chosen by was never really showing up for you in the first place. And more than that, you recognize how deeply you've been betraying your own needs just to keep someone around who barely meets you halfway. It's in that quiet space, when you finally let go, that you rediscover yourself. You see how much energy you've spent trying to control an outcome when you could have been creating peace. You notice the way your body relaxes, the way your mind gets clearer, the way your heart starts to feel lighter without the emotional roller coaster. And slowly, you begin to realize that you were never chasing love. You were chasing the feeling of being enough. But you don't need to chase that anymore, because now you see it's something you already are. A redirecting your focus inward makes you magnetic and shifts the power dynamic. When you stop obsessing over what he's thinking, when he'll text, what he's doing, or how to get his attention back, something incredible begins to happen. You start pouring that energy into yourself. And at first it might feel strange, even uncomfortable, especially if you've spent so much time wrapped up in him. But little by little, you remember what it feels like to prioritize your own needs, your own happiness, your own life. You stop trying to win someone over and start winning yourself back. You begin investing in your growth. You sign up for that class. You spend time with people who make you laugh. You go places that inspire you. You look in the mirror and start to see the woman who got buried under all the waiting, all the hoping, all the emotional chaos. And as your energy shifts from chasing to creating, people start to notice. Not just him, everyone. Because something about someone who knows their value, someone who isn't desperate for validation, someone who radiates self-trust, that's magnetic. You walk into a room differently. You're not scanning the crowd for his face. You're not distracted by what he might think. You're there, fully present, living, breathing, choosing yourself in every moment. And what's more attractive than a woman who isn't trying to impress, but simply existing in her own power? That's the shift. That's when everything changes. And yes, he'll feel it. He'll notice the change in your tone, the space in your energy, the calmness in your presence. Where there used to be urgency, now there's peace. Where there used to be neediness, and now there's clarity. And where there used to be you chasing after him, now there's you walking your own path without looking back. That shift in energy creates a ripple. He starts to wonder. He feels it even if you say nothing. Because silence backed by self-worth is louder than words. The power dynamic starts to tilt. He used to have the comfort of your attention. He was used to you being there, showing up, making the effort. But now, you've withdrawn from that dynamic. You're no longer available on demand. You've unplugged from the cycle, and that disorients him. People often don't realize how much they rely on your energy until you pull it away. That's when they start to chase. That's when they start questioning. But the truth is, by the time they notice, you're already evolving. This isn't about playing games. It's about choosing peace over performance. It's about understanding that your energy is sacred, and where you place it determines what grows. When you redirect it inward, you begin to bloom again. Your self-esteem rises, your standards elevate, your spirit becomes unshakable. You're no longer reacting to his silence or his attention, because you're not living in response to someone else anymore. You're responding to yourself. You start to attract people who meet you where you are, because you've stopped lowering your frequency to be understood. You've stopped trying to fit into places where your light was too much or your heart was too soft. You're not asking to be chosen anymore. You've chosen yourself. And that kind of energy, that's what truly shifts the entire game. Redirecting your focus inward makes you magnetic and shifts the power dynamic. When you stop constantly analyzing his actions, waiting for his responses, or trying to figure out how to get his attention, you free up massive space in your mind and heart. That energy, once consumed by doubt and overthinking, suddenly becomes available to fuel your own growth. You begin to realize how much of your day was being shaped around him, his moods, his availability, his validation. And when redirect that attention to yourself, everything begins to shift in ways you didn't expect. You start paying attention to what makes you feel alive. You start remembering who you were before you got so caught up in trying to be enough for someone who never made you feel secure. Your center, your time, your focus, your emotional energy around your own life. You begin to glow from a place of genuine self-connection. You start doing things that bring you joy, not because they'll impress someone or catch their eye, but because they light you up inside. And that glow, that quiet confidence that comes from within, it becomes unmissable. People feel it when you're rooted in yourself. Your posture changes. Your voice becomes stronger. You stop over-explaining, over-apologizing, or over-accommodating. You're no longer waiting for permission to take up space. You're no longer shrinking to make someone else feel comfortable. That kind of shift in energy can't be faked. It comes from doing the work, from turning inward, from finally realizing that the person you needed to notice you most was always you, and he'll notice it. Not right away maybe, but eventually. The person who used to have a grip on your emotions will begin to sense the distance. He'll feel the difference when you stop engaging in the old patterns. When the texts become fewer, when the attention disappears, when the emotional availability he used to rely on suddenly isn't there. It won't make sense to him at first. He'll wonder where you went. But the truth is, you didn't disappear. You just came home to yourself. That's where the power dynamic changes. Because when someone gets used to you always being there, always trying, always proving, they begin to believe that you'll never leave. They take your energy for granted. They think you'll stay stuck in that loop forever. But the moment you stop needing their validation, they start questioning their own value in your life. That reversal is not about revenge. It's about respect. Respect for yourself, your time, and your worth. Redirecting your focus inward isn't selfish. It's survival. It's healing. It's recognizing that no relationship is worth losing yourself over. It's about becoming the kind of woman who knows she's the prize and lives like it. You stop performing. You stop chasing. You stop editing yours to fit someone else's preferences. And that authenticity, that raw, unfiltered self-love, becomes magnetic. The irony is, the more you stop trying to be chosen, the more people begin to notice you. Not because you're chasing their attention, but because your energy speaks before you do. Your calm presence, your confidence, your boundaries, they draw in those who recognize your worth and repel those who only wanted access to your energy without earning it. He will notice your absence more than your constant presence. When you're always there, always available, always the one to reach out, to check in, to keep the connection alive, people begin to take you for granted. It's not always intentional. Sometimes it's human nature. When something becomes predictable, it fades into the background. When your love, attention, and emotional availability are handed over without question, they start to blend into the routine. But the moment you take a step back, the silence becomes loud, the absence becomes impossible to ignore. That's when the presence they once overlooked suddenly starts to matter. There's a strange power in disappearing quietly. Not to play games, not to manipulate, but because your soul gets tired of showing up for someone who doesn't meet you halfway. And when you stop being the one to initiate every conversation, to fix every misunderstanding, to hold space for two, they feel that shift. They feel the gap that your energy used to fill. They feel the calm where your effort used to live. And they begin to notice how much they relied on you to keep the bond alive, even if they never admitted it out loud. People notice when energy changes. They may not say it immediately, but they feel it. That good morning text they used to glance at without responding right away suddenly becomes missed. That message they used to ignore for hours becomes the one they reread. That familiar pattern they depended on you to repeat. It's gone. And what's left in its place is a question: where did she go? But this is where it gets even deeper. When you remove your energy, it forces them to confront the reality of how much they were coasting, how much of the connection was powered by you. And whether they respond or not, whether they come back or stay distant, it doesn't even matter as much anymore. Because by the time they realize your value, you've already started seeing it for yourself. You've already begun rebuilding your peace. You've already remembered that your presence is a privilege, not a guarantee. When someone becomes accustomed to your constant emotional labor, your checking in, your patience, your softness, they may forget what life feels like without it. But your absence reminds them. It reflects back everything they didn't appreciate. The support they dismissed, the kindness they overlooked, the comfort they expected but never reciprocated. You were their safety net, and they didn't even realize it until it was no longer there. The silence you leave behind speaks in ways your words never could. It says, "I've done enough. I've stayed long enough, and now I choose myself." That kind of silence is powerful because it's not angry, it's not desperate, it's not dramatic, it's clear, it's grounded, it carries a message of self-respect that echoes in their mind longer than any argument ever would. And the truth is, absence teaches better than presence ever could. When someone no longer feels entitled to your time, they're forced to ask themselves if they ever truly valued it. When they no longer have access to your heart, they realize how carelessly they treated it. It's in that space, that unexpected void, where they begin to understand what they had, or what they lost. Ignoring toxic behavior teaches others your standards and boundaries. When you respond to disrespect with silence, when you no longer engage in the same exhausting cycle, when you walk away from what drains you instead of explaining your worth over and over again, you're not being cold, you're being clear. You're drawing a line in the sand that says, "This is what I will no longer allow in my life," and the people around you take note. They may not admit it out loud, but they feel the shift. They realize that you're no longer the version of yourself that tolerated things just to keep the peace. The way people treat you is often a reflection of what you've allowed in the past. If someone knows they can cancel on you repeatedly, disappear and come back without consequence, or speak to you in a way that chips away at your self-esteem, and you stay, they assume that behavior is okay. Not because you approve of it, but because you didn't walk away from it. When you finally stop responding to that kind of treatment, when you stop explaining and just remove your presence, you're making a statement far more powerful than words. You teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate, and ignoring what disrespects you is not weakness. It's wisdom. It's choosing your well-being over someone's confusion. It's choosing not to negotiate with chaos. It's understanding that someone who truly respects you won't need you to beg for decency. You're not asking for too much when you ask for honesty, consistency, or basic respect. You're simply asking the right questions to the wrong person. Setting boundaries doesn't always mean confrontation. Sometimes the most powerful boundary is your absence. It's your refusal to reply to that late-night message. It's not picking up the phone when someone only calls when they need something. It's no longer explaining yourself to someone who keeps misunderstanding you on purpose. That quiet boundary is your strength. It tells others that if they want access to your energy, they'll have to rise to your level, not drag you down to theirs. And sometimes the people around you will resist that. They'll call you cold. They'll accuse you of changing. But that's because your silence forces them to look at themselves. Your new standard makes them uncomfortable, especially if they benefited from the version of you who accepted less. Let them be uncomfortable. Let them sit with the loss of your energy. That discomfort might just be the wake-up call they never had to face before. When you ignore toxic behavior, you're not trying to punish anyone. You're protecting yourself. You're choosing peace over being liked. You're choosing your emotional health over someone's temporary approval. And even if no one claps for your growth, even if no one understands it, You will feel it. You'll sleep better. You'll breathe easier. You'll stop rehearsing arguments in your head and start living your life in alignment with what you actually deserve. That kind of emotional clarity becomes your filter. It shows you who's capable of meeting you at your new level and who was only around because they could get away with giving you less. And from that place of strength, you'll no longer need to convince anyone of your worth. You'll only allow those who already see it. Walking away isn't weakness. It's discovering your true strength. It takes more courage to let go than it ever does to hold on. People often confuse endurance with love, thinking that the longer they stay, the more loyal they are, the more meaningful the relationship becomes. But time spent in pain doesn't add value to your story. It adds weight, and sometimes the strongest thing you can do is release what is slowly destroying your spirit. The act of walking away isn't about giving up. It's about choosing yourself in a world that keeps asking you to choose everyone else first. When you walk away, you're not just leaving someone behind, you're reclaiming all the parts of yourself that got lost while you were trying to make something broken work. You're stepping away from the noise so you can finally hear your own voice again. You begin to see where you compromised too much, where you silenced your needs, where you begged for clarity in the midst of confusion. And in that moment of separation, you realize just how strong you had to be to stay as long as you did, but even stronger to finally say, enough. People might not understand your decision. They might tell you to give it more time, to try harder, to be more patient. But what they don't see is everything you've already endured. They don't see the nights you stayed up questioning your worth, the tears you cried in silence, the way you carried both your pain and theirs just to keep the connection alive. Walking away is not a rash decision. It's a deeply considered act of self-respect. Strength doesn't always look like fighting harder. Sometimes it looks like letting go with grace. It looks like choosing peace even when chaos is familiar. It looks like releasing the version of yourself that accepted less so you can grow into someone who demands more. When you walk away, you're not leaving love behind. You're making space for a deeper, truer love to enter. The kind that doesn't make you question your value. The kind that feels like home, not a war zone. And yes, it will hurt. Your heart will grieve what could have been. Your mind will replay the good moments, the laughter, the glimpses of connection that made you stay longer than you should have. But with each step forward, the pain turns into wisdom. You begin to see that strength isn't just about being able to endure suffering. It's about knowing when to say, this is no longer for me. It's about standing in your truth, even if it means standing alone for a while. There's a quiet power in choosing yourself, a sacred kind of strength that comes from honoring your own boundaries, even when it's hard. When you walk away, you begin to see what you're truly capable of. You stop needing someone else's love to feel whole. You stop settling for potential. You stop ignoring your own intuition just to keep someone else comfortable. You become your own safe place, your own advocate, your own biggest supporter. That's when real transformation begins. Not when someone finally changes, not when they finally see your worth. But when you do, when you look in the mirror and realize that you never needed to be chosen by anyone else. You just needed to choose yourself. When you stop fighting for a seat at the wrong table and instead start building your own, that is where your true power lies.